So this is an early Beach Boys program, probably from, I would say, early 70s or 60s. I'm not sure.
No, I think it'd be more like 70s. You can see Love there's a little older.
Yeah.
So,
and that's
70s.
when the original Beach Boys played. So it'd probably be worth more.
It's got Dennis Wilson on drums, who died surfing or swimming or something, or Charles Manson's people murdered him. We never know.
So what do you think this program is worth?
It's, again, Beach Boys toured a lot. It's probably $30, $40. The interesting thing about programs is that people would go to a show, and T-shirts were a very common thing that's bought, and they've become collectible. We'll talk about those in another segment of the show. But programs were often bought, particularly in the early days when they were $5 or $10. Now a program's $40, $50, so they don't sell near as many. But tickets, see, people never really thought they paid for the ticket. Like, you got a ticket just to tell you where your seat was. So people didn't keep the ticket because they didn't pay for it. But if you bought a program, you're keeping it. You're taking it home. And we find that for sports tickets as well, where it's like, well, here's all my sports programs. Where's your tickets? Well, I threw the tickets out. That's why the tickets are worth way more than the programs, because everyone keeps a program. Most people don't keep a ticket.
Right.
But they're still good, but usually tickets are going to be worth more than programs.
This was put out for the Beach Boys' 50th anniversary tour, which was the original Beach Boys. And then the original Beach Boys in this made a special book of the history of the early Beach Boys. And as you can see in the program, they have really young pictures of them singing. So it was a special book. I think it cost like $50 at the show because it was well photographed and autographed and done. So I don't know what that one was worth, but it's a recent one from their 50th anniversary.
It's probably worth less than what you paid for it, because people just don't collect these books, much like a lot other. A book almost looks like a book. It doesn't look like a program.
Right.
So, and books are made in such quantity. I mean, anyone who reads books knows you can go to your favorite mall and there'll be a middle island there where all the best sellers 2 months later are out for $1. They're $50 books. Books do not retain value unless the books I deal in, which are 100 years old, they're okay. But new books, guys come in all the time, our shop, with boxes of books, rock and roll, sports, whatever. We don't even want them. Same with magazines. Magazines are almost always bad, but programs are different. Magazine is made weekly. Time magazine, Life magazine, National. They could be 100 years old. Nobody even cares. But a program is only made for that night or that tour. Programs have some value.
Okay, so this is a Bee Gees program. Very early.
79.
And as you can see in the picture here of the Bee Gees, you see how young they are.
That's the peak disco era for them.
Yeah,
this is when they were were the biggest touring band in the world at that moment, and that's probably a $50, $60 program.
And then we get to the official Bowie program tour, and
is that Serious
his
Moonlight?
83 tour, and
Serious Moonlight.
In some of the programs, they show you the tours or the tour dates. And if you have a program with all the tour dates or how they toured around the world, they're worth more because people can look, oh, this is the date I was in Toronto, or this is the date I was in New York. So he was just showing how he did his tour.
Unusual. There's 7 Canadian dates. Not a lot of bands would play 7. Most bands don't play Winnipeg, Quebec City.
Yeah.
So usually Calgary, Edmonton, they'll play one of, not both.
Now we're going to get into the Beatles. And Glenn has a couple of these Beatles
So this is
right
the
here.
second tour of the Beatles.
This one here.
Same, and you can see a lot of times they tend to be beat up because most of the big Beatles fans at the time were 12, 13 years old, and they read them 1,000 times, and sometimes they write stuff in them, love notes to Paul and whatever. But this program was made for every date of the U.S. to include Canada, even though it says USA at the top. The odd venue would issue their own little playbill tour book. Those are worth a lot more because they're only made at one venue and less of them made. These, because they made so many, like in that condition or this condition, it's maybe $100 program. People are always amazed it's that cheap, right? So if you get someone who's not knowledgeable, you could probably sell it to them for $300-400, but it's not worth that. It's worth $100.
And there are only 3.
And this is 65.
Yeah, there was only 3 tour programs made.
This is 64, first North American tour.
Right.
And then the final tour is 66. That's this tour.
And how much is that program?
They're all the same, about $100. This one's in a little nicer condition, so it's worth more than that. But if they're all in the same condition, like this one's really nice, they're worth about $100 because they made millions. I don't know how many they made. More than how many people attended the show, that's for sure.
The inside of the program shows the early days of the Beatles.
Some of the better stuff to get, that would one mention the fan club. If you have
Yeah.
some of their fan club stuff, which we'll talk about later in another episode, but the fan club items are often worth more than the tour programs.
The interesting thing about this picture with the Beatles, and Mick Jagger said it the best, is the Beatles never got to play a real stadium gig or a real stage. It was just, if you look, drummers, few speakers, 3 guitar guys, and you're surprised that you could hear it in a stadium because it was just basic touring stuff for a bar, not really for a stadium.
Right.
And the Beatles went out on tour like this, and the thing that Mick Jagger said about the Beatles is the Beatles never got a chance to do the big stadium tours. Because can you imagine if the Beatles did Sgt. Pepper with all the lights and costumes and stuff? So that's why Mick Jagger said they think the Stones are bigger than the Beatles because they did the stadium tours with the mega lights and gears. And the Beatles, they never got a chance to have all the varied lights and the movie screens and the big stage and props. So that's the difference that I find between the Beatles and Stones, and why the Stones were bigger touring, because they had that chance. The Beatles broke up too early. Now we're into Elton John, 79 tour. Pretty good program. He's in Moscow. And of course, he's wearing his hat because he's still going bald. But it was a young tour. And it even has O'Keefe Center, which was that pass I had where they played in Toronto. But this is a picture of him in Moscow.
And O'Keefe Center is 2,500 people. That's a small
Yeah.
venue. So that was a great place to see him.
And what do you think Elton John's worth?
Oh, over 100.
Yeah. So this is a rare one because it's called Face to Face Tour. Now, the interesting thing about Face to Face Tour, I think only 1 or 2 tours happened with Billy Joe and Elton John. Only one. Because Elton John told Billy Joe he drinks too much, and Billy Joe told him to hit the road. So they'll never tour it again together because, you know, when Billy likes to end his tour, he wants a drink or two because he's finished playing, right? And Elton was trying to be his mother guide or something and saying, oh, you shouldn't drink so much and do this and take it easy. And Billy just said, what the hell do you care? I'm touring. Like, if I want to drink after the show, I'm going to do it. And because Elton John complained a bit publicly, Billy got pissed off and said, this is the last tour we're doing. But it was a great tour.
It was
because
amazing.
2 pianos playing all the hits back and forth and jumping, packed stadium.
So many people regret not going to that tour.
Yeah.
Like I saw it was amazing. Yeah. Everyone who went to it loved it. And everyone said, well, I'll catch it next time. Well, it never happened. That was it once.
Yeah. And you can see here's the inside of the program of them together and practicing. And they had the works for this band, all the horns, drummers, and all the toys to play on it. So
the trick there was to sit dead center because the 2 pianos met right in the middle. It's not like now where Elton's piano moves around the stage.
Yeah.
So if you were sitting dead center, you had a perfect view of both of the artists.
This is the Queen program, and you can see how young Freddie Mercury is here. So this program would be worth a fair amount because it does have Queen in his young days, and it
looks to be in great shape, too.
Yeah.
It's probably $150.
Yeah. And rare because there weren't many Queen programs made at the show.
Probably they played a bit more in England, but North America, there wasn't a lot of big tours over here.
And this is a good one, too, because it's got Bob Dylan and Tom Petty. They actually toured a couple of times together. Petty and Dylan were great friends and were general touring together where Petty would play first, and then Dylan would play, and the next tour Dylan would play first, and Tom Petty would play. So they kind of switched around on their tour. And it was, as you can see, how young they looked in those days, especially Dylan, right?
Yeah.
So it was one of the early tours, but with Dylan together, I don't know, what do you think that one was worth?
That one's a little later, so it's probably $75. So who would have thought that Petty dies before Dylan? Everyone would have thought Dylan would pass,
true.
right? But
Moody Blues, my favorite band, and in this one here, you can see how young or middle-aged they are, basically, on this one. But this has the whole complete band still, because later on, the guy that plays one tambourine guy, he passed away after this. But they were my favorite band to see just because of the stage presence in their music and the history they did. I don't know how the program books go, but for fan days.
Probably $40 somewhere in there for one of theirs.
And you can see the good part about a lot of these programs, some of them show you the lighting gear and how they use their lights in their videos to tell their story. You can tell that's a real early Moody Blues program.
Yeah, that is really early.
And
programs are always worth more if you can tie them down to a particular date. Like there's one that says March 18th.
Yeah.
So that's a one of one, like it was only made that day.
Yes.
Those Beatles programs are made for every day on the tour. So if you ever get one, that Willie Nelson event you have is a one-off.
Yeah.
There's several here that are one-off. Live Aid, that's a one-off tour program. So those are always worth more than something that happens every day of the tour.
Pink Floyd, my favorite band for watching any outdoor concert.
Yeah, most Floyd, $50 to $100, depends on condition. There's some creasing at the bottom, but it's a nice looking tour book.
Now we're into the Rolling Stones, and you can see how young they are here.
Young, still being 50s probably, or close to that.
Right.
Of course, Keith looked 70 when he was 30, so what's the difference?
Tokyo 90 tour, program from Tokyo's, the Steel Wheels tour.
People love that cover.
Yeah. Actually, this program book sells pretty good.
Yeah, that's an expensive one. It's worth a few $100s.
Right. And this one is an old program book right there. And it's Rod Stewart and the Faces. So that one you can tell right away is a program from the late 60s or early 70s.
So it's Rod Stewart and Ron Wood are both
Ronnie
in
Wood.
the band who end up going the Stones.
Right. In fact, actually, here's a picture of that program.
Yeah.
And there is
Rod Stewart.
And there's Ronnie. And look how young they look. That's after that, Ronnie joined the Stones. So that program would be worth something because it shows the history of...
about $75.
Yeah, Rod Stewart playing with Ronnie Wood. My favorite band, The Who, 79, good graphic poster. And I think this one is with the other drummer, right?
Yeah, Kenny Jones.
So Kenny,
he came from Faces. He would have been in that other picture probably too.
I forgot he came from the Faces.
They all went different places.
But you can see there's no Keith Moon there. So that program wouldn't be worth as much as the older programs.
$40.
Yeah. And then this is a Duran program, one of the unusual ones.
Pop-up.
Because they made pop-up programs. And you don't see too many pop-up programs. There's only one other band. I think Genesis made a pop-up program. So they're very rare. And they made little cards. And so because this is a pop-up program and it's unusual, see how they had the puppets of them sitting, which was in the program. And then they would give little cards to it. So this was a better program to
they
sell.
They probably had a standard program, then they had the sort of the high-end one.
Yes, you paid extra for this program. And because
that's probably worth $150. It probably cost $75 at the time or something, right?
It was a rare pop-up 3D thing that they did.
It's very cool.
And they showed their tour of how they toured and stuff. So it was one of the better programs. Duran, which it was okay, but I don't know.
That wouldn't be worth quite as much, $30, $40. That Electric Light Orchestra.
Yeah, this is Electric Light Orchestra, and you can tell by the stage thing. And this was one of the original Electric Light Orchestra, not when...
the spacecraft one.
Yeah, where they had a big spacecraft on stage.
Here in Toronto, Meatloaf formed them up.
Yeah.
Remember the show with Meatloaf?
This is the later one when Jeff Lynne...
Oh, it's the second,
ELO, but he still uses a spaceship logo. And,
that
was a
new.
good stage
It's probably
show.
$40, $50 because, it's not an old program. It's a new program.
But the good thing about some of these programs, it shows you the type of stage show they had. And ELO always had this saucer light show that made them in the shows to see, right? But that's the old one.
That's the original.
ELO with the original band. And that's his early days. As you can see, Elton John's in Moscow. He's wearing a hat, because he was starting to go bald later on. And you see Elton John posters, he did get a hair transplant. And he played also in Toronto at the Sony Center, did a small show, because mainly this tour was a small tour show.
That's the cover of that program.
Yeah, the cover of his 1980 tour program, as you can see down here. And then we'll go to the next few pictures. Now we're getting into old programs of this type right here, which is rare from the 50s. It's the Dick Clark tour program. And you can see there's some autographs in here. And just see the show poster. That's Gene Pitney's concerts with the autograph.
Yeah, that's cool.
You know, and now we're into
The Who? No, this is Phil Collins, Genesis.
Yes. Okay. So this Phil Collins Genesis program was one of their elaborate programs and one of their better shows that they did with the huge video screens, as you'll see as we flip these over.
It was almost wraparound.
Yeah, it was a huge, the whole backstage from top to bottom was all video screens. And then when you click over here, you can see that's the program book, and that's a video of how the stage was built. And we'll go to the next two shots. That is the program book. And then as you open it up, see how it pops up? Now there, you see how big the screens and the lights were going on. And the next two shots shows you the elaborate, and one of the rare 3D program books of Genesis. And tour books in general. So they're worth more. It had a CD on it about how the stage got built, and then it has 3 pop-up pictures, as you can see with the next one. That was the whole stage, like it was massive. And in fact, that was the only stage show at the
BMO Field.
BMO
it's the only
Field.
one they've ever done there.
Yeah. That was
One
their
and
second
done.
last tour. And these are the blueprints. So it's a really good Genesis program book, and it was sold individually and not as the regular tour book. So here we are, Hermits. One of the old programs from the 60s. So what do you think?
65, that one's from. Well, obviously, you can see a lot of the people that followed rock and roll then were young, because like we were young teenagers, right, when rock and roll started. So what do? You write things on your program. If it's adults, they keep them a little nicer. So it's hard to find the old programs in good condition.
See how young they look in this program?
And if you got one mint, like even the Beatles one, the 3 Beatles tours are not worth that much. They did a program each year because they made all kinds of them, but most of them aren't in mint condition because younger people didn't keep stuff in mint condition.
Right,
So
back
this
then.
in mint condition's probably $200, and that condition's probably $40, $50.
Okay. The rare time of Led Zeppelin tour, but it wasn't really Led Zeppelin. They called it the Plant and Page tour. And when you click over to the programs inside, you'll see how young they were still there, mid 40s, early 50s, I think. And they played at Molson's Amphitheater back then. It was like an excellent concert. It was the last time, really, except for the O concert in England,
Right.
that Led Zeppelin ever did a tour playing all the Led Zeppelin songs.
Right.
So that would be a valuable program of Plant.
Yeah, that's again probably $50 for that program.
Hey Glenn,
Wolf, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I brought you a whole bunch of more rock and roll stuff to show you. And as I told you before, when you have over 10,000 rock and roll items, this is the place, Glory Day Collectibles, that you bring your stuff to find out what it's worth, whether it's passes, tickets, t-shirts, programs, posters, and other rock and roll memorabilia. Glenn's group, they analyze it. They tell you whether it's a real autograph, a fake autograph, a good poster, a good program, or whether they're copies.
If I'll get lucky, I'll find a joint in this pocket. No, nothing. Too bad. It's always good. You never know when you find drugs from one of the roadies.